let's start there. Before I start, do we have any new comers this time who didn't participate last sessions?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
So if you can give me a little bit of yourself, your background into finance, if there's any, or where you're working, etc.
Hi. I'm Inoka Jayawardena. Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Inoka Jayawardena. I have no financial background whatsoever. I am a lawyer by profession. I work as head of legal at Union Bank.
Great. But in a bank, you can't avoid numbers, no?
Of course.
So then you are.
That's why I opted for this.
Great. Did you get a chance to look at the previous sessions?
I did, but I didn't get a chance to go through the recording. Yeah, but the notes I went through.
Okay, good. So we did not do much about it, but still, if you go through the recording, you will get an understanding about those areas, and let me know if you find any difficulties. I will discuss with you separately.
Right. Thank you so much.
Okay. Anyone else?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. I'm Sarida Dashini, sir. I'm working at Ganesha Bank, and I have completed my master's in business management.
Okay, so you must have covered some finance there anyway.
Yes, sir.
Okay, right. So what is the area you're working?
Currently, I'm working in the IT department.
IT. Okay, great. So I think the same thing I have to tell you. Did you get a chance to look at the notes?
Sir. Yes.
Okay, right. If there's any difficulty, let me know. We will catch up. Right. So anyway, the initial stuff I go a little slow so that you don't miss much, even if you don't get a chance to join the class. But if there's anything, let me know. Right. Okay.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, I think the rest we have met before. Great. So we were in the first lesson, and this slide is the one we did last. We discussed about what are financial statements, their features, and what each of the financial statements look at in a business. And now we are going a little deeper. I'm going to go through again, not in a very detailed manner, but just to give you an understanding about each of the statements. And then we move on with this journey. Later, you come to a point that you are able to prepare the financial statements. So we will go little by little. So profit and loss account. I think most of you are aware of this. We call it profit and loss account. We call it profit and loss statement. There is a reason why we call it an account, but we don't call balance sheet account. We don't call cash flow account. You see, here you have three statements: P&L, balance sheet, cash flow. Right? Out of the three, we use the word account only for profit and loss. Other two, we don't say account. We just say statement. Well, there's an interesting thing about P&L. That is, when you prepare financial statements, this financial statement, if I use this board, P&L, balance sheet, cash flow, some we call it account, some we call statement. Account means where you pass entries using double entries, right? You have debits, credits. You pass an entry to record transaction. That is an account. Statement is just a piece of information. You don't follow any double entry or any sort of booking of entries, as we call it, right? You don't have to park entries or anything. A statement is where you extract information from other areas. It can be accounts, it can be something else. You extract information and present them. That is just a statement. So if you look at these three things that we generally discussed, balance sheet, cash flow, and P&L. P&L, in one hand, it's an account. When we record double entries, our income, expenditure, transactions will eventually hit the P&L account. We will discuss about the double entry part and all that later. Don't worry about it too much, right? It hits the account. Therefore, it's an account. At the same time, it acts as a statement as well, because the format of the P&L is different to a typical account that we use. It's different to the cash account, income account, expenditure accounts, any asset account, right? Any liability account, we have different accounts. So the P&L, the same logic follows when we enter the transaction, but it also functions as a statement. Therefore, the format of the P&L is different. It is something that we present to the audience or the stakeholders. Therefore, it is prepared in a manner that the audience can understand the story, what you are trying to say. So therefore, in the P&L, you have the sales, cost of sales, gross profit, and then you have the rest of the expenditure. So there is a format given because that's a statement as well. However, other two statements are mere statements. They are not accounts. Balance sheet is just a statement. Cash flow is just a statement, which means there's no double entry account involved. You simply extract information from different sources and showcase them in this statement. Right? I think that's understood. That's an important point to note. Sometimes when you hear these words, you might hear P&L statement. Sometimes you hear P&L account, but you don't hear the same for others, right? If you have any questions, clarifications, as I move on, let me know. I will help, right? Now, profit and loss account. I think if I'm not mistaken, I have mentioned that earlier as well. When you present these financial statements, you need to follow accounting standards. According to the accounting standards, these statements are defined. If you go to the current accounting standards, you don't find this term profit and loss account there or P&L statement. So the technical term we use in the current context is statement of comprehensive income. Statement of comprehensive income. That's the term we use in the current context as per the accounting standards for the P&L. Right. Let's move. This P&L is prepared for a period, right? It's like a movie. It's not static. So it's for a period. You have a starting point, you have an end point, and then you look at how the organization has performed during a period. Because you know, if you look at in general, you cannot talk about performance without considering a period, right? Even in the case of individual, you have to say his performance for the last year, his performance during, past month, or his performance during that race. It's a performance, right? There's a starting point and end point. There's a time period. So you look at the performance over that period. Same with a P&L. So you look at the income during that period. You look at the expenditure during that period and see whether the income side is more or the expense side is more. So generally, we look at it 1 year period. That's the statutory limit that we consider. Even you could look at accounting standards or Companies Act. So various statutes, you look at a 1 year window. Therefore, generally we prepare for 1 year period. This 1 year can be a calendar year from January to December, or it can be any other period. Probably most of the companies prepare financials from April to March. That is to coincide with the tax calendar. In certain countries like UK and all those places, they prepare from July to June. Again, 1 year, because that again is to comply with their tax calendar, etc. But there's no hard and fast rule in this period of 1 year. If you think I want to prepare the financial statement from October to September, that's no harm. That's your choice. Any company can decide what is your financial year. You have to define it and then you have to use it. But only difference is that when you define it, when it comes to other requirements like taxes and all that, there will be a gap, so that you have to prepare those financials separately again for that period. That's why most of the companies are comfortable doing it with the same cycle, so that you don't have to do a lot of reconciliations or differences. However, in the Sri Lankan context, the banks are following the calendar year, that is Jan to December, right? Except few, mostly they are following the calendar year. But there's no hard and fast rule in it. Now, I said it's generally 1 year. That means it's not a must again. If any organization want to prepare a financial statement for 6 months, 3 months, 1 month, 1 week, maybe even 1 day, it's up to the organization to decide when they want to see their performance. There's no hard and fast rule again for that, but it has to be for a period. And as I told you, we are comparing revenue or income versus expenses. So I have used the term revenue / income here to denote that these two words are synonymous, but actually, or in fact, it is not the case. These two statements have slightly different technical meaning in the accounting world, but we don't go there. For the time being, you can use either of the words to represent the same. It's about what you earn in the organization, that is income or revenue. Then we have expenses. I think most of you are aware what expenses are. So we are comparing income and expenditure. Remember, I told you there are 5 elements, right? Any organization, you have 5 elements in the accounting world. That is assets, liabilities, equity or capital. Then we have income or revenue, expenses, right? Asset, liabilities, equity, income, expense. There are the 5 elements. All the transaction that happens in an organization, you can park in these 5 buckets. So out of these 5 buckets, items that go to income bucket and the items in the expense bucket will come to the P&L. Then what you're doing is you will compare the two, and if your revenue side is more than the expenditure side, right? You have more revenue than expenses, that gap is termed as profit. So the profit is the excess revenue or income over and above the expenditure. That gap is termed as profit. The same way, if your expenditure side is more than revenue, that gap is called a loss. Now you see, it's the resulting figure we term differently, right? If it is a plus, it's a profit. If it's a minus, it's a loss. And also, when we use the verbs, there's a difference. When we talk about revenue or income, we say we earn a revenue or we earn an income. because we strive for it. We work hard. We deliberately go for it. So we earn it. Expenditure, we don't say we earn expenditure, because we are happy if we can run a business with only revenue with no expenses. That's the perfect situation if we can achieve, which is not practical. So expenditure means things that we cannot avoid. We strive towards revenue. We want to earn revenue. In that exercise, we are compelled to incur expenditure. So therefore, with expenditure, the verb you use is incur. So we earn revenue, we incur expenses. And the same terminology follows when it comes to profit and loss. If we have a profit, we say we earned a profit, because that's what we want. When it comes to a loss, we say we incurred a loss. So we don't say we earn a loss, right? So that's for clarity purpose. I hope that's clear. Any questions, clarifications up to this point? Great. Let's move. Anyway, we are discussing these things in detail later. I'm just giving you the high-level concept at the moment. So don't worry. We are discussing the items, double entry, everything later. The next statement is the balance sheet. As I told you, a balance sheet is a statement. It's not an account. And it is the position. It's a financial position. It's the state of your business. So we call it a snapshot. Right? P&L is like a movie. Balance sheet is like a snapshot at a given point in time. You can say, as of 28 August 2021, 10 a.m. This is the financial position of my company. I have assets worth so much. I have liabilities worth so much. I have equity worth so much, and I have retained profits worth so much. You can tell that because it's a status. What is the current status? So there's no specific period you have to do this. You can do it at any time, but generally what happens is these financial statements are prepared all together. When you prepare a P&L for the period, and let's say for the year ended 31st December, you prepare the balance sheet as of 31st December. So the same period, so that it talks about the same cutoff. And I told you the 5 elements. Out of those 5 elements, we have only taken 2 elements, that is income and expenses. That goes to the P&L, and then the rest of the elements, the assets, liabilities, and equity. Those 3 elements will come into the balance sheet. So that's how these 5 elements end up, right? 2 will go to the P&L, the balance 3 will go to the balance sheet. Then in the balance sheet, we talk about balancing, right? It's balance sheet. We are balancing something. What are we balancing? We are balancing 3 things: assets, liabilities, and equity. We have 3 things to balance. So what we do is we park 2 things on one side and 1 thing on the other side. What are the 2 things we park on one side? We park liabilities and equity on one side, and the assets on the other side. So as you can see in this picture, the total of equity and liabilities should agree with the total assets. That's the balance we need to achieve. in preparing financial statement. Technically, it should be the case if you record the transactions accurately. Now, if you look at the logic behind parking these three elements in this manner, one side you have the resources, right? What are the resources your company has, organization has, right? The other side talks about how you funded those resources. That means who funded them? Where did you get the money to do that? Acquire them. There's a portion provided by the owners of the business. We call it equity. And there's a portion provided by outsiders to the business, third parties. It can be banks, it can be creditors, right? It can be any other party who are supporting you to acquire your assets. That means without money, you have acquired them because they have funded. And you are obliged to pay them in future. All these things that are on your right hand side here, equity and liabilities, those are the obligations of the organization. You are supposed to settle them at some point in time. Right? That's the match. So when you prepare a balance sheet, you technically achieve this in today's context when you use ERP, so electronic version, it automatically pops this up because in the back end, when you park the double entry, you follow the logic and technically it should end up having this status without a problem. Right. Then we come to another statement, cash flow statement. Cash flow statement, again, as you can see, there's this term called flow. It's about a flow. It's not about a still situation. So if you take water, water in a cup is still water. But water coming from a tap is flowing water. It's a flow we are talking about. So a flow happens from one point to the other again, like P&L. We are talking about cash movement for a given period. Cash coming into the business, cash going out of the business. The period can be, like we discussed for the P&L, generally it is 1 year, but it can be any other period depending on what the organization wants. As I told you, generally when we prepare the statement, we prepare all three statements together. So we follow the same period nomenclature. Now, this statement, one might have a problem now. We have 5 elements we call asset, liabilities, equity, income, expenditure. And we have already parked all those 5 elements in the previous 2 statements. We have parked some in the P&L, we have parked the balance in the balance sheet. Now, what are we going to park here? Is the question. Now, here, it's a different perspective we are looking at. In the previous 2 statements, all the figures you extract from wherever you get it, those figures are based on what we call the accrual basis. Let me explain that before I get into the cash flow. When we record transactions in a business, we can record them using 2 bases. One is called accrual basis. The other one is called cash basis. In good old days, mostly the family business, sole proprietorships, even today I can see that happening. Most of the businesses used to prepare their financial, so used to record their transactions based on the cash movement. Let's say for argument, you sell something. You sell something. I sell a book for 50 rupees. So when you get cash, it's a sale. You collect cash. And I record it today. Let's say I sell a book on credit. I sell a book 50 credit. I expect the person to settle me in 1 month's time. So the cash basis says, don't record until you see cash. You record transaction based on cash movement. So if you go by the cash basis, you don't record that sale in your books. You record that in 1 month's time when you collect cash. That is cash based. That is, you record transactions based on movement of the cash. There's a problem in that method. The problem is you only consider the movement of cash, but you don't consider the timing of the transaction. Let's say this book, you pay cash to your supplier 40 rupees and get this book into your business, then you will record 40 as your expenses. But you sell it on credit in the current month itself, expecting money to come in the next month. So you will record the sale in the next month. Your expense is in the current month, your sale is in the next month. So current month, you will show a loss. Next month, you will show a bigger profit. So that was not accurate. That doesn't give the true picture of your business transactions or the performance. And that is why this concept called accrual basis came into the picture. Accrual basis says, don't worry about the cash movement. You need to look at the transactions. Look at when you incur the transaction, right? If it's a sale, when you make the sale. The moment you raise the invoice, it's a sale. Whether you collect cash today or tomorrow, 1 year, it doesn't matter. That's a different situation. The collecting cash is a separate transaction. Sales is a separate transaction. Same way, when it comes to expenditure, if you have consumed a service, if you have consumed something, if you acquired something, you have incurred expenditure. Say, for example, when you use electricity in your business, you are consuming the electricity. You get your bill in the next month, after the month end, but you have consumed, which means you have incurred the expense. That is the meaning of accrual basis. So in current context, we prepare our financial statement or we record transactions in the books based on accrual basis, both income and expenditure, all the transactions based on accrual, irrespective of the cash movement. Whenever the transactions take place, we record it. And that is how we prepare the accounts, and that is what we use to prepare the P&L and balance sheet. So now you understand the P&L and balance sheet represent the accounting records based on accrual basis. It does not talk about the cash movement. Now, if you look at a performance of a business, cash is one of the fundamental elements you cannot ignore. In other words, we call cash as the lifeblood of a business. Irrespective of whatever the transactions you book in your accounts, the real movement of the business, real flow of the business is dependent on how effective is your cash flow. So cash is required. Therefore, it is required for anyone to look at the cash movement of the business. And this statement is prepared for that purpose. So as you can understand, you cannot extract from any of the accounts directly because accounts are done on an accrual basis. This is cash. Therefore, you have to separately prepare this statement. So this statement captures cash coming in and cash going out. Right? Money flowing in, money flowing out. And This captures the transactions you find in both P&L and balance sheet, because this is a holistic picture of the cash movement of the organization. It's not only one side or another, right? It looks at the entire organization. So when we prepare this cash flow statement, we break this cash flow statement into 3 groups. We call them activities: operating activities, investing activities, and financing activities. Why we break them into 3 is because we need to figure out the cash movement from these different aspects of the business. And it has a meaning. You will understand when I explain. The first category is operating activities. This talks about the cash movement of a business, coming in and going out, from the core operation of the business. What is the core operation of the business? If you are in the business of buying and selling, the core operation is buying of the goods and selling of the goods, and other activities directly connected to that task. So you have to incur expenditure in this exercise, salaries, electricity, water, all that. That's part of the operation, right, in that business. So whatever the outcome of this segment of your cash flow, we calculate the net operating cash flow after netting off the inflow and outflow. That segment will show the net impact of your core operations in cash terms. Now, in other words, if you go back to your P&L, in the P&L also we have the same thing. In the P&L, we look at the operations. But there are certain activities that are not directly attributable to operations in the P&L, like interest, right? There are certain other items that won't directly go to the operation. That's why if you look at in certain organizations, when they prepare P&L, before the profit before tax item, we have operating profit, or we call it profit from operations. So that component captures the core business. What is the result of our core business? And then after profit from operations or operating profit, you can park the other income, other expenditure, all these, the other items that are in the nature of income and expenditure, but not part of the core business. And then you show the profit before tax. So that's the correct way of presenting a financial statement to give the true picture of operations. If you just say the profit, that will capture everything in the business, which might include even one-off items. Let's say you have sold part of your business during the year and got a huge gain. That is not your core business, right? You are not in the business of selling your business. That's a one-off. So technically, that should not reflect in your regular profit. But if you look at the profit before tax figure as an individual item, that captures everything, including that. That's why we say when you prepare P&L, it's always good to have profit from operations separately and then other items after that, so that a reader can understand this is the regular business of this entity and this is what they have generated. Now, the cash flow from operating activities show the profit from operation equivalent, what you find in the P&L, in cash terms. In the P&L, you find it irrespective of the cash movement. Let's say in the cash, in the P&L, you can have credit transactions, right? I'll give you a basic example. You can have sales. I'll put sales, cost of sale, GP. Then you have other expenses. Then you have profit. Let's say sales 200, cost of sales 80, your gross profit is 120, your expenditure can be 100, profit can be 20. So this could be the situation in your P&L. In this, if I break them into cash and non-cash, out of these 200 sales, 150 credit sales, only 50 was cash sales. Out of this cost of sale, you have 40 on credit and another 40 on cash. You have purchased items on cash. So in cash terms, I have 10 here, I have 110 here, non-cash. Then out of this expenditure, you can say 50 cash, 50 non-cash. Right? So, what is the situation? I have 40, I have 60 here, 40 minus 60 plus. Now you see the picture. Now when you look at this, in your P&L, your profit is 20 plus. But in cash terms, it's a 40 minus. In simple terms, in the P&L, you show a positive picture performance, but if you look at the real cash version of that, you have actually lost cash during the year. While you earn a profit, you have lost cash.
Sir, is it right
That's
to
the
understand?
interpretation. However, sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
Sir,
That was
is
the
it right to, is it right to understand in this position the company has a liquidity issue for that particular area?
Not really, because we are still, if you look at the cash flow statement, we are still looking at the first category.
Okay, all right, understood.
And also, this is not the exact way we prepare the cash flow. There are other elements. I'm showcasing you the logic here.
Okay.
Right?
Thank you, sir.
So, yeah, the logic is that while you earn a profit on accrual basis, from cash point of view, you have actually lost cash. And this is the part sometimes most of the businesses don't understand. They think we are doing well, we have sales, we have excess, we have a margin. They calculate. Most of the family businesses, small businesses, I see this day in, day out. They are comfortable because they know their sales are good. They know their margins are good. So technically they think, okay, naturally we have to have a good business. But with all that good profits, they still run into difficulties with cash. They have a lot of overdrafts. They run to the bank every other day for various facilities. While the business is a profitable business. So the profit is, remember, is just a book entry, right? But the real business is run on cash, right? It doesn't mean you to have a lot of cash, but it's just that how you manage your cash. Now look at this particular business. I'm not saying this business is bad, right? I'm not saying this business is bad. It's okay to have credit sales. It's okay to have non-cash expenditure. The trick is this. In the long run, if you have more credit sales in your business, your collection process has to be efficient. If your collection process is not efficient, let's say you have 150 here to be collected. If you don't collect this properly, let's say you collect only 50, you're losing 100, right? So in the long run, you will find it difficult to run the business if you don't have an efficient collection process when you have credit sales. So that's a different business aspect that we need to look at and analyze. That's why for bankers and all, you need to have that insight and ability to interpret this. So if you, let's say you go and take a blood report and you see your platelet count has come down below 150. It is 120. So the natural perception we have, what do we say? We say, okay, I'm having dengue. That's what we know. Yeah, when you have dengue, your platelet count comes down. So you think I'm dengue. But if you go to a doctor and say, don't worry, don't jump the gun, it's too early. This is just one indicator. There are other reasons why your platelet count can come down. If you have an infection, there is a possibility that it can come down, right? But the doctor will look at other parameters. There are various other parameters like PCV and all that, right? And then they decide what is that. So likewise, the moment you see this, don't think that this company has a serious issue here, right? There are other things we to look at, but the idea I just want to show you that in the P&L you can see a profit, but in cash terms, it's a different story altogether. In the operating cash flows, this is not the exact way we prepare the operating cash flow. Remember, for the current year, it is not only this 50 that is considered when you prepare the operating activities cash flow. So this 50 is about the cash collected during the year out of this 200. That is the during the year sale. You will also have cash collected from the previous year credit sales. Right? There can be sales in the previous year on credit or your debtors as of the last balance sheet date. There may be collections during the year. So those collections you can't find in the P&L, you collect it offline, right? So cash coming into the business. So that cash figure should also come here onto this. You add, right? Because this 40 is about only cash movement based on the P&L. There is cash movement in the balance sheet activities as well. You are settling your liabilities, right? If you settle your loans, it doesn't go to the P&L. It's going out of the balance sheet figure. If you borrow from someone, you get cash. It's coming to the balance sheet. Likewise, there are cash transactions in the balance sheet as well. So we need to consider all the cash transactions, whether it's balance sheet or P&L, but connected to operating activities. Collection from debtors is operating activity because we are collecting our previous credits. So the point I'm trying to make is under operating activities, we are capturing all the cash transactions connected to operating activities of a business. So the sales, the collections from sales during the period, paying salaries, so various other expenditure from cash, all that. And it does not include any non-cash activity like depreciation. Depreciation is a non-cash activity. It is there in the P&L as an expenditure, but there's no cash movement. So it won't come here. So you prepare this cash flow from operating activities by taking all that. So when you prepare this cash flow from operating activities, there are two approaches the finance professionals take. One approach is we take the P&L first, right? We take the P&L. We take the P&L first, and then you take the profit. From the profit, you make adjustments. You make adjustments to non-cash items. You know the profit is arrived at after considering both cash and non-cash items. And then what you do is you take the profit figure, you do adjustments for non-cash items. For example, the profit figure is arrived at after deducting depreciation. Now you go and add the depreciation back to eliminate that impact. And similarly, if you have income items, non-cash, you eliminate that impact as well, right? If you have added, you deduct. If you have deducted, you add back. So you do the opposite and adjust it. And that is one way of preparing the cash flow from operating activities. That is called the indirect method. What we do is we take the P&L and do adjustments. The other method is called the direct method. There what we do is we independently identify the cash transactions in the business. We don't go to P&L and do adjustment. You straight away identify how much have we actually paid in cash for salaries. How much have we actually collected from sales? You do that. That's the direct method of doing it. So technically, irrespective of the method you follow, your answers would be the same because you are trying to get the same thing using two different approaches. Technically, it should be the case. But practically, the second approach I just mentioned is slightly difficult because then you have to dig into all the transactions and figure out all cash transactions. Therefore, in practice, most of the organizations follow the first method I mentioned, that is called the indirect method. You take the P&L figure or the profit figure and then do adjustments to arrive at the cash flow from operating activities. Don't worry about this preparation. So you are not expected to prepare a cash flow for the exam, right? Don't worry about those complicated stuff. I am giving you the idea so that you know what it is, that you know how it is prepared, and you know how to read it. That's what you need to know, right? When your finance people or whoever prepares comes and tell the story, you need to understand what is the meaning of that. Now, you have an idea about the profit. You have an idea about the cash flow from operating activities. Before I talk about it further, I would like to now give you a chance to clarify anything if you have up to now. Any doubts?
Chairman, this is Rajiv here.
Yeah, Rajiv.
The process of recording transactions, how do you facilitate preparation of the cash flow statement? Of, at what time cash flow?
Sorry, Rajiv, you broke in the middle. I didn't get the complete question. Can you repeat? I think we lost him. Or others, can you hear? Is it only me?
No, I think we lost him.
No,
He's back.
Rajiv, yeah, you're back, I think. Yeah. Rajiv, I couldn't hear your question. Can you repeat?
Yes. Yeah, just to know how in the process of recording the transactions,
Yeah.
how do you make the entries so that you can extract the cash flow from those entries with the timing? How does that happen?
There's no such thing. There's no such thing. When we record entries, we record entries following the accrual basis in the double entry system. So the main source we use, if you look at the direct method, is the cash book. We have a cash account anyway, with all those transactions. There's a cash account also. So whatever the cash movement will go and hit the cash account, cash and bank. So in current context, we consider both cash and bank as synonymous because that's the case, right? So there's a separate account for that. So if you look at the cash book, it should have all these transactions because technically all the cash movement should hit the cash account. Okay. So from there you can get it. And that's actually what we do in most of the cases when we don't have books of accounts, let's say, for certain organizations, they don't maintain proper books of accounts. But most of them have some kind of a cash book or cash account. Or in a worst case, if you do bulk of your transactions through the bank, you have bank statements, right? So that will give you a hint about the cash movement, and that will be the source. Other than that, there's no separate accounting for this.
No, but Shaminder, from a future perspective, now say what is right now, yes, from the cash book, but from a future perspective, how do you extract from the account, at what time particular cash inflow or outflow is happening?
But even in current or future, the cash book is good enough because cash book captures with timing, right? Every transaction hits the cash book at the time the transaction took place. You have to record the transaction based on the timing of the transaction. So all the cash movement will hit the cash account. So it has everything from cash flow.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it.
Any other?
Shaminder, I think
Yeah, Neval.
the cash flow statement we are discussing here, it's the year-end this thing, but in practice, I also use another more operational cash flow where I plan, it basically we start from the balance in the bank account, and then we list whatever the cash flows coming from, planned cash flows coming in from sales. Then whatever the payments like salaries, the operational stuff, and also purchases. That's like a weekly thing that I do. So that's more of an operational cash flow, which is actually done, I think, in my understanding, it's kind of a direct method as opposed to, because you don't have any P&L to adjust on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah.
Just
I
observation.
think you're talking about the forecast, right? You are doing it for the next week.
Yes, correct,
Yeah,
correct.
So that is outside, that's outside the double entry accounting we are looking at.
Yeah.
That is about planning. I think that is encouraged in the current context anyway for all the organizations, right? Because we are living in a highly uncertain and complex world. So it's always good to know and plan ahead what's going to happen. So weekly cash flow forecast and certain organizations we do daily because they are so dynamic, right?
Yeah.
So take a stock of your cash at the end of the day. So what are the urgent payments you have to do next day, and you prioritize it. So that is a management tool we use to manage your cash in the business. We call it a cash flow forecast. So that is different to what I'm discussing now. What I'm discussing now is a post-mortem report, right? It's basically once you end the period, you prepare a P&L for the period ended, whatever the period, and the balance sheet as of that date, and the corresponding cash flow statement that captures all the cash movement during the period. These are two different things, but talking about the same thing, that is cash.
Got it. I think the learning for me here is the forecasting aspect. That
True.
I think I was a bit confused.
Yeah, great.
Yeah.
Good. Yeah.
Thanks.
But that is more relevant in current context than what I'm discussing now, because that is the historical position. You're talking about the future.
Yeah, thanks.
Yes, Rajiv, you raise your hand again.
Actually, Shamid, I was also referring to the cash flow forecast, not the.
All right. Okay. Now I think you got it clarified, right?
Yes, I did.
Yeah. So your finance guys need to have an idea about that anyway, because they need to have, but there more than that, you need further. You should be having a proper idea about possible future cash transactions, right? You need to make a reasonable guess or estimate about how much of your debtors can be collected, right? You have to make an estimate, and you also need to identify different types of transactions that you have to settle, right? Your debt obligations, your supplier payments, your salary payments, various other payments and commitments. So they need to have a proper understanding. Sometimes these guys tend to miss some of these seasonal payments, right? You might pay salary every month. You might pay electricity every month, but there may be certain contractual payment that you are supposed to pay on a quarterly basis or at identified timelines. You should have a good understanding about those things and plan it accordingly. Sometimes you miss them. So that's the talent you have in your finance function to be able to trace all those pending payments. Sometimes we have this situation, your supplier payments and various payments to different suppliers. You know, this procurement department does all this communication with the suppliers. Sometimes if the invoice is in their drawer, and it comes to you at the last minute, the payment, let's say the payment should happen, let's say in September 15th, right? These guys come with the invoice on 14th, right? Then you don't have that in your cash flow forecast. In your forecast you did in the previous week, you haven't captured that. So that's why it's not only finance, the entire organization has to have that process in place to make sure that all the commitments that the organization has, initiative from different departments need to come in. Sometimes the HR might come up all of a sudden and say, look here, we have to pay a gratuity, that we have 10 senior positions leaving the organization. It's a sizable figure maybe, right? You know, salary you have to pay every month, you can forecast, but gratuity is a one-off, all of a sudden it comes. So all the departments in the organization need to have that understanding, and the finance should be efficient enough to coordinate and make sure that they get all these commitments in advance and do the forecast accordingly. Otherwise, if you are, sometimes most of the organization live from hand to mouth these days with, you know, cash flows. So you prioritize what is absolutely necessary. Right? So you can't push these kind of payments. That's what you said, but that's more than what I discussed, but that's more important in current context. Right, any other questions? Any other? Okay, right, let's continue then. Right, so I've discussed about what operating cash flows is. Now we have an idea. In simple terms, we can say operating cash flow is, although it is not the exact thing, but you can simply interpret as the cash version of your profit, right? The cash version of your operating profit. That's more or less what you get there. Now, according to the example I gave you earlier, we had 20 profit, we had 40 cash outflow, net outflow. So the interpretation is the company has made a profit but lost cash. That's the idea. So last year we made a profit and last year we lost cash. So we were in the business of losing cash. Now that, how do you define? So that is very important for an organization, right? Technically, sometimes people ask when I discuss this topic, what would be the ideal, right? What would be the ideal? What would be the ideal ratio? What would be the ideal figure, ideal range kind of things? So from operating cash flow, if I am to give you a rule of thumb, it should be positive. If you are a good business, it should be positive. It should be plus. That means you should be making cash. You should be generating cash in your business. Right? If your cash flow is a negative thing, that means you are in the business of losing cash. So technically, it's an unhealthy situation. You need to look into. That's why you should not just get carried away with cash or the profit alone. I always use this example. P&L is like your face, right? It can be beautiful. You can see a beauty queen, fair and lovely. However, if this beauty queen is suffering from leukemia, how comfortable are you to marry her? Right? So that is the situation with organization as well. P&L is like the face. It looks beautiful when you have a profit. But if you are not healthy in terms of your blood, especially blood is the main thing in your body, that is cash flow, right? So that is very important. Now let's go to the next one. Investing activities. Investing activities capture non-routine transactions that are generally of long-term nature, but not necessarily long-term, but can be short-term as well, but non-routine. Investing. What do you mean by invest? You invest, you put money expecting a direct or indirect return in the long term, right? And we also capture this investing does not go with your normal definition of investment, because anyway, when we talk about investment, we say we invest on something expecting a return, right? We invest on shares, we invest in fixed deposit, something like that. But this captures something beyond that. Even when you purchase a fixed asset, a building or a land, that is also considered as an investment in this case, because that's not your routine purchases. So under this category, you look at investing on fixed asset, fixed deposits, any kinds of instrument as an investment to earn an additional return, plus acquisition of property, plant and equipment, that is building, land, furniture, whatever, all that is coming under this. So if you acquire a machine, cash goes out, right? It's a cash outflow. If you sell a machine, cash coming in. Now, you must understand, when you interpret the cash movement here, you have to be careful. You can have a positive cash flow here under investing activities. Positive cash flow in investing activities means either you have realized your investment, you have sold your investment and collected cash, or you have sold your assets and collected cash. That's the meaning of this. So you should not be jumping up and down the moment you see a good cash flow here. Probably you must have sold your machine that generates your production and earn cash. You must have sold your chicken that lays the golden eggs. So you can get more cash than selling eggs, but you won't have eggs to sell thereafter, right? That's the tricky part. You need to be very careful here. Don't get excited when you see positive cash flows. I'm not saying it is bad to have positive. The point here is that in the investing activities, you need to understand how you get positive cash flows, how you get negative cash flows. At the same time, the main thing here is not the value, whether it's positive or negative. Main thing in this category, when you want to interpret, you must look at what contains in this, right? You go one step further and see what are the contributing factors for this cash movement, positive or negative. For example, you have a negative cash flow in the investing activities, let's say. You go and see why. Then you realize there's cash outflow from the business to acquire a land. There's cash outflow from the business to acquire a machine. So which means, depending on the purpose for which you use those items or you acquire them, it can give you a positive implication. Let's say current year, you have a cash outflow, you purchase a machine, but in future, it's going to generate more revenue. It's a good thing. So the point I'm trying to make here is that unlike the operating activities, I told you very clearly, you have to have positive cash flows. If it is negative, it's a problem to look into. Under investing activities, you can't judge by looking at the number, whether it's positive or negative. you need to also look at what are the contributors to this cash movement, and you interpret accordingly, whether it's a good thing or bad thing to have. Then you go to the financing activities. Financing is about funding the organization. So in simple terms, this is where you capture capital raising. You issue shares and collect cash, right? And you borrow from a bank or various other sources. Both ways, right? Borrowing and settling. If you borrowed from a bank, your cash flow may be positive. If you settle a loan, your cash flow may be negative because cash going out. So in the end, you will see the net impact of all these three activities in your cash flow. The total cash movement during the period, cash coming in and going out, you can summarize into these three activities: operating activities, investing activities, and financing activities. And the net result of all these three will be your net cash flow. Your net cash flow position can be your positive or negative. So the point I'm trying to make here is that on the face of it, if you have overall positive cash flow, that is good. That means you have generated cash during the period from all these activities in overall sense. That is a positive signal. But the ideal analysis should not be at that level. It should be at this bucket level, right? Because your overall positive cash flow can be a result of having a negative operating cash flow and a high investing and financing cash flow. Maybe you have borrowed during the year, you have sold your assets and collected money, so you have a positive cash flow at the end of the day, right? But it's not a healthy situation. Therefore, you need to analyze each of these buckets separately, while having a positive is good in the end. So when we prepare the cash flow statement, the structure is, Rajiv, I'll come to you. I show you a can. You have the cash and cash equivalent at the beginning. So remember, when you prepare the cash flow statement, another term comes into the picture now: cash equivalent. It is not only cash. When you prepare the cash flow statement, you take cash plus cash equivalent. That is, items you have that can be conveniently converted into cash when you have a need. So that in the current form, that is not in cash, but it's almost equal having cash. For example, if you have 3 months fixed deposits, generally we consider a window of 3 months around to look at short term. You have treasury bills, short term treasury bills, fixed deposits, call deposits, right? Although technically you cannot withdraw immediately, but having that kind of a facility gives you the flexibility to withdraw them within a short notice without a major loss to the organization. Convertible. So those items are considered cash equivalent. So therefore, when you prepare the cash flow statement, we take all of them together. So you have the beginning balance of all of them, and then you show the movement during the period breaking into these three categories, and then you have the closing balance of cash and cash equivalent at the end of the period. So technically, whatever the balances you have in your bank, cash book, and various other places that you consider as cash equivalent, you find in the statement should tally with what you find in your balance sheet. In your balance sheet, you have all these items, the closing balances, right? That's the reconciliation, right? The end balance of the cash flow statement should agree with the respective balances in the balance sheet. Right, Rajiv, you had a question.
Shamita, where do the dividend payment go? It's financing activity.
Technically, it's a financing activities because this is the return you give back to the owners of capital. But there is a debate about this in certain organizations, including interest payment. right? Say interest payment, people say, okay, we borrow, borrowing is part of our financing activities. Therefore, the interest payment should also go under financing activities. And there's another crowd arguing, we have to borrow to run the operations. There's a need in the operation to run the show. That's why we borrow. Therefore, interest payment is operating activity. So sometimes different organizations park this interest and dividend either on operating or financing. That it's a choice they make based on the argument. But technically, it's a financing activities. Everything connected to financing is financing activities, right? The best thing is when you read your cash flow, you have a look at where the organization has parked it and then interpret it accordingly. You look at the impact and see, right? That's how it is. Any other question? Right, I think we all are clear. So I took some time because I want to explain it slowly, clearly, so that you don't have to revisit about this. I want you to understand in the first round. And to be frank with you, I sometimes get even CFOs not getting some of these concepts right. They blindly sometimes follow the courses. They know how to prepare the cash flow. They know the mechanical process, but sometimes they miss some of these conceptual aspects. I find many people I have to say without any fear, even chartered accountants, right? At some points, they are masters of preparing the financials, but they are very weak in interpreting, very weak in interpreting it. That's the problem with their CEOs and the top management and the board. When they come, they sound very technical, they sound outdated, they sound, outside the business because they make mistakes when they interpret it because they don't understand. Sometimes I blast some of these people when I get into some of the forums, even board meetings and all that. They come and boast about their cash flow. We have made so much cash. Then I dig inside and say, look here, you have made so much cash. Show me your operating cash flow. Right? That's where the catch is. And they come and say, look here, anyway, in the end, we have balanced the cash. We have positive. So that's wrong. The same goes with people as well when we manage our individual cash, right? When we run our day-to-day financial management of our personal this thing, right? We sometimes run on credit cards, right? We run on we sell our vehicles and house and we run the show, right? We spend a luxury life, but we don't realize our operating activities is not the one that drives us. Sometimes when you have a credit card, first couple of months you are a rich man, right? When you get the statements, then you get into the debt trap because you don't adjust your lifestyle to your operating cash flow. You adjust your lifestyle to your total cash flow, which is wrong. Okay, let's move. Now this point onwards, we don't have much technical stuff. This is just qualitative things that we need to know, but there are certain points you need to know for exam purpose. Therefore, I will stress on them. Please make note of it. Business organizations and users of financial statements. Now, business organizations, when we talk about them, there are different types of sorry, I got a little disturbance. Right. There are various types of business organizations you must have heard when you look at. You have sole proprietorships, partnerships, companies, family businesses, all kinds of businesses. But for education purpose, we can understand how a business evolves. So if you look at the normal life cycle of a business, any business starts small, right? You start as a sole proprietorship. That's the first version of businesses. So this is a fruits business by Siripala stores. Now, there's one owner, individual, he runs the show. So it's his business. Then we have the next level. You can add other people to your business, invite your friends or whoever, still run your business. The Siripala means Kirihami. Right? This is a village story. So the Sira and Kira stores. That's again a store. This is a partnership. Now you have more than one person, but running a similar type of business by be much with a little more work, little more business, little more stuff. Volume wise, it might be bigger. Then the next level would be from both these types are kind of informal. Why I call informal? They are not incorporated as proper businesses. They are businesses, but they are not illegal. They are not illegal. They are legal businesses, but not very well established. The next level is a company, right? A company. So your company can't have Siripala type of names. It has to be posh, right? They have used Siki Private Limited, right? Right. Now you can see a corporation or company incorporated under an act as a separate legal entity. So we establish businesses like sole proprietorships and partnerships, but when it comes to companies, we call it incorporated because they get a legal personality. So now I have to be careful today when I use these legal aspects. I have a lawyer today. Please correct me if I make any incorrect statements. Now, that is the basic stuff. Now we need to understand the features of these businesses and pros and cons. I'm not going to discuss a lot of things, but there are few fundamental things we need to know. I will only touch those. Now, if you look at sole proprietorships and partnerships, more or less the same. The features are, it's very easy to organize this organization because when you have some money, you can start business anywhere, right? You don't have to have even a building or anything. If you want to sell fruits, you can take a chair, keep the chair on the road, keep some fruits on it, business, right? So it's that simple. So you decide the scale that you want to operate and low cost. Now you have few minuses or challenges. One is limited resources because it's whatever you personally can reach or what you have to start with. And there's something called unlimited liability. Let me explain that a little bit. This is common for both sole proprietorships and partnerships. When we establish this organization, you can register your business. There's no harm. Whether you register your business or not, you run the business. It's not illegal, but irrespective of the registration you get, you don't get what we call legal personality. There's something called legal personality. That is, if you have legal personality, the law recognizes you as an independent unit. which means you can appear in your business name before courts for legal matters. Now, for sole proprietorships and partnerships, you don't have that. Sole proprietorships and partnerships, because you don't have legal personality for the business, you have to deal with those matters in your personal names as individuals, right? So you are personally liable. So let me take an example. This is a fruit business. Let's say the Siripala wants to improve the business and he wants to now sell fruit juices, right? Because he got a bright idea when he sees that every day he has to throw a lot of fruits away. Now he got an idea, let me not throw them, let me convert them into fruit juice. Now, one of the customers, after having the fruit juice, get a stomach ache and then it got bad. Now, food poisoning. It went to a serious level and this fellow come and file a case against the company, claiming damages. So Siripala started this business, investing 10,000 rupees. Now this guy comes and asks for 50 million damage. Now in the case, let's say if you lose the case, but the entire business has only 10,000 worth of assets. Now the law says you are liable without a limit for the business matters, which means the law can come to your personal assets, personal wealth. Your liability doesn't stop at your business. It can come to your personal life as well. So in this case, if the business has only 10,000, pay it off. The rest, they'll come to your house. You have personal wealth. You are now bound to pay out of your personal wealth. That is called unlimited liability. So you are liable for business matters without a restriction. It can come to your personal wealth as well. The same is true for partnerships as well. Because in certain countries, we have limited liability partnerships. In Sri Lanka, to my knowledge, we don't have that law to establish limited liability partnerships. We have partnership ordinance of 1840, I think. We have only unlimited liability type. That means if you can operate as a group of people, but still your liability is unlimited. The partners are collectively and severally liable for the obligations. However, the plus is when you have a partnership, you have more resources, more people coming into the picture. Therefore, there is a scope for further expansion. And you get more skills into the picture, more brains into the picture. Therefore, you can get best decisions out of that. So those pluses are there, but the liability matter is the same. And there's another part that is common to these two types, which I have not mentioned all these things, is that the succession, right? That is also a concern in these two types, because the moment the owner discontinues or dies, the business will also go for a natural death, because most of these businesses are heavily dependent on the owners. Then we go to the third type we discussed, the private limited. The word limited is the key here. So what is limited? That is the liability of the shareholders is limited to what they invest in the company. So if you have invested 100,000 in the company, a case like we did before, right? We got a food poisoning case and you lost the case. The law can't come to your house. It stopped at the company, right? So if the company has whatever the assets, the maximum loss to the investor in that case is what you have invested. The worst case, you won't get anything from your company. You lose 100,000 that you invest. That's it. They won't come to your house. That is the protection you get by incorporating a company with limited liability. So there's a term called veil of incorporation when you establish a company. That means there's a curtain in front of you. You can hide behind that veil, right? People don't see you. People only see the company. So you have to file a case against the company. So the company has what we call the legal personality. Therefore, you can go before court in the company's name and you can be represented by counselors or whatever. You can keep the shareholders away. But there are instances the law can lift the veil and see who you are, right? There are exceptions. There are situations where the law can still go through that veil and capture the shareholders and act on them on different terms. But on a normal case, if you act within the legal framework, you have the legal protection. And there's another part I will clarify for practical purpose. Some people have this clarity as well. You know, these taxes, when you get to pay the taxes and when you are supposed to open a tax file and pay taxes, if you have a business, if you have a sole proprietorship business, you can't pay taxes from the business. There's no tax for the business, right? Because the business doesn't have the legal personality, you can't have a tax file for the business. You have to file your tax file in your individual name, and you have to add the profit you generate from the business as part of your income. You can have your salary, you can have your rent income, and you can have your business income. You add everything together and pay your taxes individually because they don't have legal personality. But in the company, so that is the same for sole proprietorship and partnership. But for the company, there is corporate taxes because company is recognized as a legal entity, legal personality. Therefore, they can have their own tax file independent of the individuals. So with that, you get those pluses in a company, whatever the weaknesses you observe in a sole proprietorship and partnership, right? The ability to have more resources, ability to get more knowledge, everything is there. And also, when you are a company, you get further advantages. Like you are recognized in the market more than a sole proprietorship or partnership, especially by banks. When you go for financing facilities, they give more weight for established companies than individual businesses, because these companies are established based on acts of parliament and they are bound by those legal framework. There's more scrutiny and there's more governance. Therefore, other stakeholders are comfortable working with that kind of companies, businesses. That's a plus. And there are other benefits like economies of scale. You know what economies of scale, right? Anyone needs clarification? Or anyone explain it if you know? What do you mean by economies of scale? Any idea? Haven't heard of this?
Yeah, it's economic terms. Once the manufacturing facility or the number of equipment increase, the cost per unit will be reduced.
Yeah, that's the technical definition of economies of scale. What happens is when you operate in large scale, right? When you generate larger quantities, your per unit cost can come down because you have the benefit of low wastage. You have the ability to maximize the productivity because large company can afford to establish an R&D department, quality control, and all those things. Right? They can afford because they are operating at a larger scale. So that will allow you to improvise your process. And when you operate at a larger scale, you can also get bulk discount from your supplier so that your cost of material will come down. So likewise, there are various things. When you produce in large quantities, your per unit cost can come down. That is what we call the economies of scale. When your scale goes up, the cost comes down. So when you operate in a company, you have that ability because you can operate in a larger volume than other two categories. Those are all pluses. And limited liability is also a plus. But there's something called double taxation. What is that? Double taxation is, as I told you in the previous two cases, there is no separate taxes for the businesses. You pay taxes only once. You collect the profit into your personal earnings and then pay taxes along with your personal taxes. But in a company, you have corporate tax. The company has to pay taxes. Then you have profit after tax. And as shareholders, what you get is the dividend. So the dividends are paid after paying taxes, right? Your dividend is paid from post-tax profit. And when you get the dividend, that is an income for you as an individual. And then you have to pay taxes as an individual for your income. There are certain dividend income, depending on the tax law of the country, that is exempted. Right? There are certain income that is BOI companies, and there are various arrangements. If you earn dividend from a tax exempt source, you don't have to pay. But in a normal case, because you have to pay taxes as an individual, your dividend income forms part of your income. Therefore, technically, you are paying taxes twice. Right? That is a kind of a challenge, and some people also consider the additional legal burden is also a challenge or a negative factor compared to other two types. Other two types are more flexible, but here you have to follow the provisions of the Companies Act. So preparing accounts is mandatory, getting your accounts audited is mandatory, and you have to act within the Articles of Association and Companies Act provisions. So therefore your scope is limited, restricted. People sometimes consider those as challenges as well. So it's how you look at the thing, you can explain it. Okay, any questions, clarification on this part? Right, so for exam purpose, if you can understand these basic principles, because there are questions in the exam from this area. What are the different types of organization? What are the advantages and disadvantages? Now, there is also an area for the exam that tests your application knowledge. That is, sometimes you get questions like, they give you a scenario, and then you are supposed to act as an advisor. Let's say you are a member of an advisory firm or an audit firm or a finance advisory services, whatever, and you get a client and they give the details about the client and the requirements, and you are supposed to advise. So here is one example I have seen in the exam. There's this person who has retired from his business and wants to start his own business. He has retired from his job, wants to start his own business. And he would like to run his business without his involvement. He is trying to put one of his neighbors in the business. And this guy has retired from the job and he wants peace of mind. And he doesn't want any trouble to come from the business to his personal life. He wants his business to be independently run and no more headaches to come from his business. He's willing to invest his retirement proceeds and there are further information. And in the middle of the question, they ask, help this person to clarify these questions. And one of those questions is, what should be the most appropriate type of business for him to start? Should it be a sole proprietorship, partnership, or a company? What would be your answer with the information I just gave?
Company.
Company.
Why?
In the other two scenarios, he doesn't want to get personally involved also, but then he won't be able to have a claim on any assets or anything. But in a company, if he just becomes a shareholder, makes his investment, then his liability is limited. But of course, he will be entitled to the returns by way of dividends, and at the end of the life of the company or upon winding up, whatever the surplus is there.
Yeah. So a lawyer speaking with all that knowledge, right? Even when you wind up, you get all that, right? See, that's the thing. So when you look at a practical situation like this, one can say when you retire, when you start a small business, you start as a sole proprietor, right? So maybe you can start with as a partnership, because you don't want to get involved in the business. You get one of your neighbors, your relatives, let the person run the business. You stay away. It's a partnership. So you can come up with those arguments as well. But the catchword here is he doesn't want to get any disturbance, trouble, headache from the business back to his personal life. He wants to maintain that distinction. That's the main statement in this question that gives you the hint about what is the most appropriate type. If you don't want to get any headache, any liability after that from the business more than what you have invested, then go for a limited liability setup, right? Other two setups, whoever, because you say you are not willing to run the business, you put someone else. If the guy, whoever is running the business, play a blunder and brings in more liabilities, then you are supposed to pay for it, right? You are in trouble. So you can make up your mind, you invest something, the maximum loss to you is that amount. Therefore, the most appropriate type would be limited liability company. So likewise, your knowledge about these different types of businesses is tested with that kind of scenario-based questions as well at the exam. Sometimes it's a straightforward. They say, explain different types of businesses. Advantages, disadvantage. You can even copy and paste the answer because it's an open book exam. Right? Right. Any other questions, clarifications? Right. If you don't have any further questions, let's take a break now. It's 9:40 already. We'll get back at 10 o'clock.